Hello everyone, my name is Katherine Bennett. I'm a registered dietitian and I currently practice at Child Children's Hospital in Orange County, California. I'm super excited to be here today presenting virtually on my experience with Blenderized diets, and I'd like to thank the Oley Foundation for having me. I truly appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak. So thank you guys, and let's get started. So today we'll be talking about Blenderized diets, the good, the bad, and the broccoli. I have no disclosures. Our objectives are as follows. We'll review the history of Blenderized tube feedings, we'll learn about potential benefits and risks, and then we'll learn what it takes to start a Blenderized tube feeding diet. So first off, what is Blenderized tube feeding? Well, it's the act of using pureed or blended food and liquids as a partial or complete nutrition source through a feeding tube. So basically, we're taking food in its full form, looking like this, and blending it so that it can fit into a nice syringe and be given through a tube. So this slide kind of shows a brief history of Blenderized tube feedings. We're not the first generation or two to have been doing it. We have some reports on record about 3,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks and Egyptians were doing infusions of grains and milk, whey, wine through the rectum. And then in the 18th century, we have our first report of feeding into the stomach, so gastric feeding. And we were using, again, jellies, eggs, wine, milk, beef, tea. And then not until the 19th and 20th century, we had some really profound improvements in tube feeding. We had the development of our first pump, our first gastrostomy tube, as well as commercial formula. And this was developed, I think, with NASA's help in that they were trying to find a diet for astronauts that would help eliminate the waste problem in outer space. And because of this, commercial formulas were born. So we saw the Blenderized diet use decrease with the advent and increase in commercial formulas. And so leading us to where we are today, we have got hundreds and hundreds of formulas, lots of specialty formulas, but we're seeing this trend or continuing this trend back to blending. And in fact, now we have formulas with real food ingredients in them. And I would like to attribute this to you guys who are blending, who've been home blending for years or perhaps decades, and help challenging us and driving us to do the research and pay attention and letting us know how Blenderized tube feeding is helping. So why Blenderized tube feeding? Well, the dietary guidelines for Americans for 2015 to 2020, encourage us to eat more real food, less processed food. So in general, we've got guidelines telling us to do so. We're also paying attention, all of us, whether we eat by mouth or eat by tube, we're paying attention to what we eat as well as the ingredients in the foods we eat. We also want to do more individualized nutrition, and with Blenderized tube feedings, we can do that. And lastly, we're seeing a huge improvement in GI symptoms with the use of Blenderized tube feedings. So where are we now in terms of Blenderized tube feeding? Well, we all have more experience and support. This means those of you who are blending have more experience, and we as clinicians have more experience. We're seeing fewer problems with blends than we previously thought. We're not necessarily seeing the issues with equipment malfunction or illnesses, foodborne illnesses that we originally were a little bit scared of. We still have lots of case reports of essential fatty acid deficiency, things like scurvy on Blenderized tube feedings without dietitian support. And we also now have excellent guidelines on how to do a Blenderized tube feeding diet. Lots of resources out there for the clinician who wants to do more of a Blenderized tube feeding diet practice. In terms of research, the research continues to show improved tolerance with blends over commercial formula. We're seeing a benefit to our gut microbiome, or all the bacteria and yeast and things that live in our guts. We're seeing decreased risks of tube blockages compared to previously thought research. We were worried about tube blockages. We were also worried about more microbial contamination leading to foodborne illness. That might be overstated. We had recently our first study looking at Blenderized tube feeding and showing how it can decrease healthcare utilization and decrease healthcare costs. And we now actually have guidelines for the hospital or the clinical setting. to do blenderized tube feedings. And lastly, we've got, at least on my last count, 27 different options for commercial products made with real food ingredients that are now available. So let me share with you a little about my experience in blenderized tube feeding. We definitely have some benefits and risks, and I definitely see these in my own practice. Benefits, of course, better tolerance to tube feedings, more satisfaction from the caregiver or person participating or feeding the tube feeder, more satisfaction as a tube feeder that you get to choose or have a say in what you want to eat. We're seeing improved GI health. In the particular pediatric population, or kids who aren't eating that much, we're seeing them change and become interested in eating with the use of blenderized tube feeding. And of course, we're seeing, again, like I mentioned earlier, we're meeting these global nutrition guidelines and recommendations that we set for those who eat by mouth. And we're also able to customize our blenderized tube feeding diets or customize our nutrition therapy. In terms of risk, I still see inadequate nutrition, poor weight gains and growth, maybe some equipment malfunction, maybe I have not seen in my own practice results of microbial contamination, but there is technically an increased risk with the use of food that we know is inherently not sterile and having to be cognizant of food safety practices when we prepare it. We definitely need more research, of course, and then we still have families doing it on their own without support. And what I'd like to say about this is that us as clinicians need to be better about accepting blenderized tube feeding and learning more about it so that we can better help our families. And I do have to say that many people have and continue to do well in commercial formula. So in terms of improved tolerance, I am seeing improved stooling patterns in my practice. You know, a blenderized tube feeding diet is not sterile. We've got a high variety of foods. It's much less processed, and we can customize it to create a stooling pattern, the desired stooling pattern. With formula, it is sterile. It is going into our gut, which is not sterile. There's limited or less variety. It's processed, it has to be, and we can't necessarily customize it very well. And so with a blenderized tube feeding diet, we can add things like bananas or oatmeal to help create, a more thicker stool if someone's struggling with diarrhea. Or we could add prunes and nectarines and kiwis for someone who is struggling with constipation. So in terms of improving tube feeding tolerance with a blenderized diet, it's definitely linked with an improved stooling pattern. You're stooling better, you're going to feel better, and you'll tolerate your feedings and your meals much better. And tube feeding or tube-fed consumers have IBS or irritable bowel syndrome-like symptoms, with bloating and diarrhea being the most often reported. And commercial formulas contain ingredients that can worsen these symptoms. And so what I've done in my practice, and probably other practitioners as well, is that you can really customize blends to include or exclude foods that can be bothersome or beneficial in terms of tolerance. In my practice, I work with a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome, and so we're using a lot of what's called the low FODMAP diet, fermentable oligomonosaccharides and polyols. And we're using this type of approach in our blenderized tube feeds to even elicit a better response and better stooling and better GI symptoms. So thinking about why we're seeing more improved tolerance or improved feeding tolerance with blenderized tube feedings, one being that they're thicker. They aren't rapidly as absorbed as formula potentially. They're easier, they stay down a little bit longer, meaning in a pediatric population, they might not be as easily to work up again. They could be eliciting a different hormonal response in our bodies that therefore help us tolerate them better. And as we're investigating, researching the microbiome, we have found that decreased bacterial diversity can be associated with human disease. And one study has linked single formula use, which can lead to decreased diversity in our guts. And so with blenderized tube feedings, we're able to increase the diversity in our guts with the use of blenderized tube feedings. So in terms of diet and gut health, we are constantly learning about how food plays a role in our health, particularly in preventing and protecting against disease. And so foods are now studied for their physiological benefits. And so you might have heard the term functional foods. While there's no universally accepted standard definition, we might think of this as more like functional blends, kind of using the same notion as we would for those who eat by mouth, but applying it to people who eat through a feeding tube. And so this has led to us studying these foods, particular food groups, that could have a profound effect on our gut health and overall health in general. So for example, with Blenderized diets, we're able to add back beneficial foods like yogurt and kefir, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, potentially spices like turmeric, cinnamon, and ginger. All of these play a role in our gut health with our gut bacteria. These antioxidants and phytochemicals can all help potentially decrease inflammation in our guts and decrease inflammation in our bodies. So definitely being able to have this possibility with blends can definitely help improve health outcomes overall. And of course, at the same time, we'd be decreasing sugar, decreasing highly processed foods, potentially, decreasing our intake of food additives and preservatives, and having a similar outcome. And of course, I always like to stress to my clients that I prefer real food over supplements, just because real food, there's a special interaction that food has on its own in your body and when combined with other foods. And so we very rarely need supplements. We'll talk a little bit about that later on in the talk. So we can also look at diet and brain health in terms of how Blenderized diets can potentially affect our brains. We know that from some studies, we know that diets high in healthy fats, fiber, and low sugar helped with memory function and cognitive flexibility. We also know that diets high in trans fat, saturated fat, and sugar show impaired cognitive function, learning tasks, memory, academic performance, and increased risk of mental disorders. So with our Blenderized tube feeding diet, we can create more functional blends to help with brain health potentially. All of those foods that we might eat by mouth to help potentially with our memory, our cognition, we can definitely blend and put through a tube. For example, green leafy vegetables, broccoli, fatty fish, avocados. All of these foods have been are being studied for their implications and benefits for our brains and brain health. And of course, conversely, decreasing our sugar, our highly processed foods, again, food additives, colorants, and preservatives in the same light. So I want you to know there's no studies, head-to-head studies looking at, brain health with commercial formula and brain health on Blenderized diets. I'm just extrapolating what we know about the people who eat by mouth and kind of applying that as something to think about and why we would choose Blenderized tube feeding diets to help with both gut health, brain health, and overall optimal health. So who can do Blenderized tube feeding? Well, almost everyone, I would say. Tube feeders, if you have the feeding tube, we'd like you to be medically stable. Ideally, your tube is in the stomach, you have a mature site, you have a large enough tube for the blends to go through. You're stable in terms of your weight, you're older than 6 months, and you're fed through a syringe. Although this isn't always a must-have list, these are most recommended things to have to be able to do Blenderized tube feedings. In terms of the parent, the caregiver, or if you're a tube feeder who makes their own meals, affording foods and equipment, have a good understanding of nutrition needs and goals, understand your health, your condition, definitely understand basic food safety principles, be motivated, and definitely have the time, and I would add in the patience as well. So in terms of starting a Blenderized tube feeding, I always encourage people to do their research. That means scouring the internet, both good and bad, potential there. Asking friends and families, asking other people who have a tube feeder in their life and who are being tube fed, asking your physicians, getting as much as you can background information before you start can definitely help set you up for better success. Excuse me. Also review the benefits and risks. There's a lot of info out there on the internet now. I think now with all of us paying a lot more attention to blends. So you can even utilize my slide deck if you want to review those risks and benefits at another time. I do encourage meeting with a dietitian, and I will say that more of us are getting comfortable with blenderized tube feeding, so I hope it'll make it easier to meet with a dietitian that is experienced with blends. But if you meet with a dietitian that's not experienced in blends and they're willing to help you, that's how I started. I had never done this before. I met with a family, a mom for the first time about 10 years ago who wanted to do blends really, really bad. And we worked together and practiced, and I learned as much from her as I hope she did from me. And so a nutritionist or registered dietitian can help you set nutrition goals and kind of give you a frame point of where to start from. You'll also want to set your goals, like, you know, what type of diet or nutrition did you want to put through your tube? What do you expect? What do you want from blenderized tube feeding? Again, assess your motivation. Like, is this something you feel like you're going to try long term? Do you understand the work that it takes? And definitely review your schedule. Will this fit into your life? You know, it's not all or nothing. Some people do a little bit of blends, some people do all blends. So know that, you know, be realistic with yourself. Also be realistic with how comfortable you are in the kitchen. Are you a takeout type of person and, you know, microwave type person? You don't have to be a Martha Stewart or Wolfgang Puck to be able to do blends, but you have to at least, you know, understand how you function in the kitchen and where you are with measuring foods. And of course, you know, I've helped many clients who aren't fabulous cooks be fabulous blenderized diet makers. And then of course, it's always good to brush up on safe food handling as well. So where to begin? This kind of slide represents 3 different ways to do a blenderized diet. I'm sure there's other ways. You know, you can stay on your commercial formula and just add baby foods or single ingredient foods. So maybe like yogurt or pureed fresh fruits and veggies in addition to your prescribing on the formula. Or you can do a mixture of blenderized diet and commercial formula. You know, maybe on weekends you blend, and during the week when you're really busy, you get the formula. Or you can just want to move all to a full blenderized diet. So the next couple slides will deal with the term the right nutrition, or, you know, the right recipe. And there isn't really one right way to do this, I have learned. I would say about 10 to 25% of my families that I work with are doing more meal-based blending, where you're blending, you know, several times throughout the day. And what I help my families do is estimate kind of a calorie goal to start with. And within that calorie goal, as you can see here, how much of fruits and veggies and proteins do you need? And I know that us who eat by mouth don't get everything we need every day, and I don't necessarily expect that from my tube feeders as well. But this is a nice starting point and can guide you so that you're not too, you're not underfeeding in any of the food groups in any way. So the majority of my families will do what's called recipe-based blending or batch-based blending. And so this is kind of where you're blending up everything in one big batch, and you're using that batch over the day. You might be blending up more batches at one time and freezing them. On your screen, you can see what I call the Costco batch. This is by a family who spent a weekend blending 48 days worth of their child's nutrition, so that, you know, they'd only have to blend once every 48 days. And so I thought this was a fabulous example. So they were really nice enough to share their recipe with me. You know, us dietitians have lots of tools in our toolkit, so we can create a lot of customized or individualized recipes, including high calorie, low calorie, allergen free, or also if, you know, there's been some recent weight loss, we can give you suggestions for boosters, calorie boosters to add to blends to make sure that we get the weight back on track. And again, there is no right way. There's always better ways if you're struggling with a blenderized diet, but the best way is one that works for you in every aspect. And by that, I mean you're maintaining good nutrition, you're maintaining good weight, you're feeling great, and you're able to sustain the preparation and have the equipment, supplies, and the food that you need to do this. So this is an example just of an allergen-free recipe that my colleagues and I put together. And, you know, we throw around a lot of these calorie terms, 30 cal per ounce, 1 calorie per milliliter. So this would replace You know, 1 ounce of this would be equal to any commercial formula. That's 30 cal per ounce or 1 calorie per milliliter. And so if you'd like to see the numbers, you're a numbers person, we try to balance our blends or our recipes based off of a certain percentage of calories from carbohydrates, protein, and fat to keep them balanced. So with Blenderized tube feeding, not only do you want to make sure you've got enough calories, protein, and fat, but you also want to make sure that you have enough micronutrients, so vitamin, minerals, things like that. So this slide just shows you that, you know, food is abundant with all these things, and that we can make our blends nutritionally sufficient from a micronutrient standpoint. We may or may not need to add a vitamin depending on the medical status, lab work. And we typically usually will recommend adding salt to give you a source of sodium in your blends. Many times blends are whole food, they're not processed, so there's really no source of salt in them. And salt's a very important, you know, plays a very important role in the body. We want to make sure we keep your electrolyte levels stable as well. In terms of equipment to prepare blends, you don't necessarily need a fancy or an industrial blender to blend, although it does make life easier. You know, depending on how you're going to give blends, whether you're going to give it through a pump or a syringe, that'll kind of dictate what equipment you need. We're aiming for pancake batter or cake batter smooth, you know, pancake batter or cake batter consistency, especially when we're dealing through a pump. And so an industrial blender can definitely help with that. An industrial blender can also give you more options in terms of what foods to blend versus if you had more of a NutriBullet or household blender, you might have to do some prep work to get those foods to blend really well. You may or may not need a strainer, then you definitely need some measuring spoons and cups. In terms of storing and giving our Blenderized tube feedings, this comes from the food safety literature and recommendations. We can store them for up to 3 months in the freezer, up to 24 hours in the fridge, and they must be fed within 2 hours. So if you're using a pump, we have to run them 2 hours or less. In my experience, I found a lot of people tolerate bolus feedings or pump feedings 2 hours or less of a Blenderized diet, much more so than formula. So how do we ensure success on a Blenderized tube feeding? Well, of course, we want to make sure that you're satisfied with everything about it. The schedule, the preparation, the recipe. Of course, we want to make sure that you're tolerating it really, really well and that you feel good on it. It is recommended that you have dietitian support and involvement, but it's also recommended that you have medical team support as well as family support when you're on a Blenderized tube feeding diet. We also ask that you be open to the ongoing adjustment of the goal or the plan. When I meet with my families, you know, I say what we set today isn't going to be necessarily what we might do in a month. And in kids, especially what we might not be doing 6 months or a year from now. And then, of course, we'll always want to monitor our weight, our growth, and lab work as well. So a nice study by Teresa Johnson reported, you know, parents' experiences with Blenderized tube feeding and their kids. And they found that 50 to 90% were using some sort of Blenderized tube feeding, but only 25 to 50% had dietitian support. And of course, kids are at a higher risk because we have to get them to grow. They need to grow, they need to properly develop, and especially more so in our medically complex population. And so I do understand that not everybody's on board with the Blenderized diet in terms of clinicians. And so I'm hoping that will change. It's definitely getting better as all of us, or more of us, get more experienced with it. But I do ask you to seek out dietitian support, or at least physicians to support, someone who's willing to meet you where you are and help you, even if they don't necessarily have the experience, but someone to help you make sure you're on the right track, especially if you have a pediatric tube feeder. So common mistakes that I found in my practice are lack of essential fats. And this sometimes can follow the diet trends for those of us who eat by mouth. With the popularity of coconut oil and coconut products, you know, if we're just exclusively using that as a fat source, we're going to be missing out on our essential fats. We're definitely seeing low carbohydrate, high protein blends out there, so too much protein, not enough grains. Focusing on juicing, sometimes I'll have families come to me where they're juicing, not necessarily blending, but they're juicing, and so we're missing out on a bunch of nutrition and fiber with just juicing. And a very common problem that I see is difficulty obtaining goal nutrition with desired consistency, meaning you need to get in 1,000 calories a day. you're blending, but when you blend, you make 2 or 3 liters. Or you make 1,000 calories and it's super thick and you got to add in another 20 ounces of water, but your tube feeder, or you as a tube feeder, can't tolerate that much volume. So I definitely work with my families to help, help get that recipe or those ratio of foods to liquid manageable and keep the calories high and the volume low if we need it. And then lastly, the 3 micronutrients that definitely can be low in a blenderized diet without support are calcium, salt, and vitamin D. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk today, we've definitely seen a huge increase in the number of commercial products. And I like to think about these, I'm happy they exist. I'm so excited that we're seeing these products out because they provide a nice way for families who can't blend to have that same opportunity to give real food or get real food. So I look at these in terms of specific ingredients like the protein source, the taste, are they palatable? The thickness, the thickness is going to determine how easy it is to get through a pump. Nutritional completeness means, do they have, in a certain amount of volume, do they have all the micronutrients and macronutrients that you would need? And so that's not necessarily a thing I always look for. It might be more beneficial in a family that doesn't have time to add things back into the diet or give extra supplements or follow a recipe. Really a detailed recipe. So that's definitely something on a case-by-case basis that I'll review. And of course, these products sometimes follow popular diet trends. We're seeing a trend of plant-based diets. So a lot of these products are plant-based protein now. And then of course, insurance coverage definitely plays a role in who can get these products, or typically who can have access to these products and who can afford these products. So this is not an inclusive list by any means with every single detail about these products, but there's some examples of the products on the left. Standard formula, I've listed, some common protein sources of standard formula and common protein sources of these real food commercial products, as well as carbohydrate sources. So I will look at these, and of course, if we're assessing an intolerance for some reason, or sometimes a nice comparison to show people, the differences between products. And so it's nice to be able to customize that, that either blenderized tube feeding product or that commercial product to you as a tube feeder, or to you to your tube feeder if you're a caregiver. So where to go to get help on a blenderized tube feeding diet? Well, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a registered dietitian find an expert page, which you can go on and search in your local area. Not every dietitian will have experience, but the goal is to find a dietitian who can at least help you assess your nutrition needs and give you a starting point, or maybe review your diet. We spend a lot of time as dietitians evaluating diets that people eat by mouth. So we could apply that same knowledge and do that for diets that go through the tube. Seek out friends and family. A lot of my patients, with their permission, I'll set them up with someone who's a pro blender who's been blending for a long time. So I'll set up my new families with a pro blender just to have that one-on-one support. And of course, there's always social media, the internet, and books. And of course, social media is a double-edged sword. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of nutrition and diet stuff, but there are also some really good resources that my families just shared with me. Some things that I've listed up here include a complete tube feeding book by Eric O'Gorman. I think he speaks from personal experience, but they have great information on tube feeding in general, as well as blenderized diets. The Homemade Blended Formula Handbook by Marcia Dunn Klein and Suzanne Morris has been very popular, as well as your own Oley Foundation and the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation have some great resources or great starting points for a blenderized tube feeding diet. So where do we go from here? Well, I think we're going to continue to see improved health with blenderized tube feeding. We're always going to want to know what we're eating and seek out information on how we can improve our eating, improve our nutrition. I also think there's going to be a lot more commercial blenderized tube feeding products available for us to use in the future. And I'm very excited about this. This is a new territory for use in medically complex children and adults. I think time will tell, and we'll probably get some good, takeaways on what we need to do, what's going well, what's not going well. We definitely, of course, need more nutrition studies. They are hard to do, but we definitely need more. And I think with all of us, you as people who are blending, people who are getting blenderized tube feedings, all of us who have experience, we're going to continue to see risks, we're going to continue to see benefits, we're going to be able to delineate the good from the bad, or the more risky from the less risky, and be able to further streamline our recommendations and guidelines. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks again.